Echo in the alley. The city of Chicago bled its stories onto the asphalt, and at 3:17 a.m., it was Anya Sharma's job to mop them up. The story was a familiar one, a dissonant symphony of sirens tearing through the humid night, the acrid smell of burnt rubber, and the metallic tang of blood that she could already taste on the back of her tongue. Her partner Dave, a man whose optimism had been sandblasted into dust by 2 decades on the job, navigated the ambulance through the sleeping streets with a practiced, weary indifference. Dispatch said single vehicle MVC. Roll over, he grunted, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Probably some drunk kid in his dad's car trying to impress a girl who isn't. Anya didn't reply. Her focus narrowed to the methodical ritual of checking the seals on the trauma bags. Her hands moved with a fluid economy that belied the bone-deep exhaustion etched into the lines around her eyes. At 27, she felt she carried the weight of twice that age. The night shift was a relentless beast that fed on youth and sleep, and hers was a life lived in reverse, fueled by stale coffee and the corrosive adrenaline of other people's tragedies. The debt from her paramedic certification was a mountain. Her father's nursing home bills were an avalanche threatening to bury her alive. This job wasn't a calling anymore. It was a leash, yanking her from one disaster to the next. The call led them not to a major thoroughfare like the I-90, but to a narrow cobblestoned alley in the West Loop, a sliver of forgotten history wedged between a derelict meatpacking warehouse and a new, soulless glass condominium. The scene was wrong, terribly, fundamentally wrong. A single black sedan, a late-model Mercedes that gleamed even under the sickly orange glow of a single street lamp, was crumpled against a graffiti-scarred brick wall. It hadn't rolled over. It looked like it had been savaged, slammed repeatedly from the side by something immense. The driver's side door was perforated with a tight, unnervingly precise grouping of holes. "This ain't no MVC, Anya," Dave said, his voice dropping an octave as he killed the engine. The silence that rushed into the cab was heavy, oppressive, broken only by the distant melancholic hum of the city. "This is a message." Protocol was crystal clear, a chapter in the handbook stained with the coffee of 1,000 tired paramedics. A potential crime scene meant they waited for CPD. They were medics, not targets. Their duty was to secure the scene from a safe distance, call it in, and let the men with guns and Kevlar vests clear it. But then Anya heard it, a sound so faint it was almost stolen by the wind. A soft, wet gasp. The sound of someone fighting, stubbornly and desperately, to exist. "Dave, I hear something," she said, her hand already closing around the cold metal of the door handle. "Don't you even think about it," he warned, his eyes dark pools of caution, scanning the shadowed doorways and rusted fire escapes that seemed to watch them like skeletal predators. "This whole alley screams ambush. We wait." "Wait for what? For him to bleed out?" Another gasp, weaker this time, tore through the heavy air and straight into Anya's conscience. Her training, the oath she'd taken in a bright, hopeful classroom that felt a lifetime away, screamed louder than Dave's logic. She saw her father's face in her mind, frail and papery, his chest struggling for each breath in a sterile white room. She couldn't save him from the slow decay of his illness, but she could save this man from the brutality of the alley. "I'm going in," she stated, her voice flat with resolve as she grabbed the heavy jump bag. "Anya, for God's sake, that's a Kincaid car. You know who the hell they are." She did. Everyone in Chicago knew the name Kincaid. They were ghosts in expensive suits, a name whispered in connection to the unions that built the city's skyscrapers, the construction contracts that reshaped the skyline, and the kind of problems that simply vanished overnight. They were the modern corporate face of the old Irish mob, a legacy of violence sanitized by wealth and power. "All I see is a patient," she shot back, her tone leaving no room for argument. She slammed the ambulance door, the sound echoing unnaturally in the confined space, and moved. She kept low, using their vehicle as cover, her boots crunching softly on loose gravel and broken glass. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and something else. A faint, expensive cologne, a scent of sandalwood and leather utterly out of place amidst the decay. The man in the driver's seat was young, barely out of his teens, with a shock of dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and blood. His tailored suit, a garment that likely cost more than her monthly rent, was soaked, a grotesque crimson flower blooming on the white canvas of his shirt. His face was a deathly alabaster, his breathing shallow and rapid. A textbook tension pneumothorax. Her mind diagnosed instantly. His chest wasn't rising properly on one side. Without immediate intervention, his lung would collapse, his heart would be crushed, and he'd be dead in minutes. Ignoring the jagged shards of the shattered window and the chilling, watchful silence of the alley, she went to work. Her hands, so often weary, were now steady and sure. She cut open his shirt, her favorite engraved shears slicing through the $1,000 fabric without a second thought. Just as she suspected, a sucking chest wound. She pulled a vented seal from her kit. "Hey," she said, her voice deliberately calm and firm, a professional anchor in a sea of chaos. "My name is Anya. I'm a paramedic. I'm going to help you, okay?" His eyes fluttered open. They were a startling, icy blue, a stark contrast to his pale skin, now clouded with pain and confusion. "Ronan," he whispered, the name a faint puff of air. "Don't talk. Just try to breathe." She applied the seal, then prepped a 14-gauge needle for a thoracic decompression. It was an aggressive, incredibly risky procedure in the field, one that could get her license suspended if she got it wrong, or if the review board decided she'd overstepped her authority in an unsecured scene. Dave was right. She was breaking a dozen rules. As she located the second intercostal space just above the third rib, she felt it, the chilling, primal sensation of being watched. She glanced up, her eyes darting over the jagged line of the rooftops, the black vacant squares of the warehouse windows. Nothing but brick and shadow. But the feeling was undeniable, a cold pressure on the back of her neck, the raising of hairs that was pure animal instinct. Shaking it off, she refocused, plunged the needle into his chest, and was rewarded with a distinct hiss of escaping air. The man's breathing immediately eased, his chest beginning to rise and fall more evenly. Dave appeared at her side like a reluctant shadow, his face a mask of grudging admiration and pure, unadulterated terror. "Cops are 2 minutes out. Let's get him on the board now." As they carefully loaded him onto the gurney, the young man's hand, surprisingly strong, grabbed her wrist. His blue eyes, clear now and sharp with a terrifying lucidity, locked onto hers. "He'll find you," he rasped. "The police? They're on their way." A humorless, bloody smile touched his lips, a grotesque sight. Not them. They were speeding towards the bright, sterile chaos of Chicago Med's ER when Anya realized she'd left her favorite shears behind. The ones engraved with her initials, AS, a graduation gift from her father. She cursed under her breath. It didn't matter. In the grand scheme of things, a pair of shears was nothing. She was wrong. It was everything. 2 days of suffocating silence followed. Anya worked a double shift, immersing herself in the controlled mayhem of the ER, trying to outrun the memory of the alley. But the young man's warning echoed in her mind. "He'll find you." She found herself jumping at shadows, her eyes scanning for black sedans in her rearview mirror. She called the nursing home twice a day, her casual, just checking in calls fooling no one. Least of all, the head nurse who knew her father's condition hadn't changed. Then Ronan Kincaid found her. She had just finished a grueling 16-hour shift and was walking to her beat-up Civic in the hospital's multi-level parking garage. It was that dead hour just before dawn, and the concrete structure was a mausoleum of quiet cars and long distorted shadows. The air was cool and damp. A black Range Rover, silent as a shark, pulled up beside her, its engine a barely audible purr that spoke of immense power held in reserve. It blocked her path. The tinted passenger window glided down. He wasn't what she'd expected. There was no cheap flash, no oversized gold rings or slick-back hair. He was dressed in a charcoal gray suit that fit him with bespoke perfection. His hair was dark, his face a collection of sharp, handsome lines that looked as if they'd been carved from Connemara marble, and left out in a harsh wind. But his eyes were the coldest things she had ever seen. A flat, emotionless gray. They seemed to absorb the garage's dim light and give nothing back. He was 36, but his eyes were ancient. Anya Sharma, he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. His voice was a low baritone, smooth and dangerous, like whiskey poured over a honed blade. Anya froze, her hand tightening on her car keys, the longest one positioned defensively between her knuckles. I don't know you. You saved my brother's life, he continued, ignoring her denial as if it were an irrelevant piece of lint on his suit. Finn, the boy in the alley. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating against a cage. This was him. Ronan, the man his brother had whispered about in a bloody plea. I was doing my job, she said, her voice tight and clipped. No, Ronan corrected her, his gaze unwavering, dissecting. You were not. Your job was to wait for the police. You broke protocol. You performed a needle decompression in an unsecured active crime scene. You risked your career, your safety, and your partner's safety. The question is, why? He wasn't thanking her. He was interrogating her, peeling back the layers of her actions to expose the motivation beneath. She felt like a specimen under his microscope. Because he was dying, she snapped, a spark of defiance cutting through the fog of fear and exhaustion. And my job, my real job, is to stop that from happening. Now, if you'll excuse me. She tried to step around the front of the SUV, but the driver's door opened and a man built like a vending machine stepped out, silently blocking her way. Ronan's eyes narrowed slightly, the only sign of his displeasure. You left these behind. He held up a small, clear evidence bag. Inside were her shears, the initials AS, clearly visible, stained with the dark, dried blood of his brother. My people are very thorough. A cold dread, sharp and debilitating, washed over her. He hadn't just found her name. He'd investigated her. He knew. The name on the shears was a key, and he had used it to unlock her entire life. Give them back, she demanded, her voice trembling slightly. In a moment. First, you will tell me what you saw, what you heard, every detail. I gave a full report to the police. You told the police what a paramedic would report, he countered, his patience clearly a finite resource. I want to know what you saw, the details a cop wouldn't think to ask for, the smell in the air, the sound of the other car's engine. Was it a V6 or a V8? The direction it went, the accent of anyone you might have heard. His focus was absolute, a laser of intensity. He wasn't just looking for information. He was assessing her, gauging her usefulness, her threat level. She swallowed, forcing herself to meet that chilling gaze. I don't work for you. A flicker of something, annoyance, maybe even a sliver of dark amusement, crossed his face. That is where you are mistaken, Ms. Sharma. The moment you chose to save a Kincaid, you started working for me. You just haven't received your first paycheck. He gestured with his head. Get in the car. No. The vending machine man took a step toward her. Don't, Ronan said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, and the man froze instantly, as if his strings had been cut. Ronan's gaze returned to Anya, pinning her in place. The men who did that to my brother are members of the Vasiliev syndicate. They are Russian. They do not leave witnesses. They know a medic unit responded. They know someone saved Finn before he bled out. They are currently looking for that someone. They are, Ms. Sharma, looking for you. The blood drained from her face, leaving her feeling cold and hollow. You have two choices, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion, laying out her fate as if discussing a business transaction. You can get in this car and you and your father will be under my protection. Or you can walk to your little Civic, drive home to your second-floor apartment, and wait for the Vasilievs to find you. They won't be as polite as I am. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink into the concrete floor. And they will not stop with you. They will go after your father. They will find him in that quiet, clean nursing home. They are not sentimental men. It was the mention of her father that broke her. The image of that brutal alleyway violence touching his fragile world was an agony she couldn't bear. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a chilling, bitter resignation. This man had her trapped, and he knew it. He had walked up to the cage of her life, studied the simple lock, and calmly informed her that he held the only key. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. She hated him in that moment with a purity she hadn't known she possessed. She hated his power, his certainty, his cold, gray eyes that saw her not as a person, but as a chess piece he was now moving across the board. "Fine," she said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to his driver. The man got out and opened the rear door for her. The interior was a cocoon of black leather and profound silence. As she slid in, Ronan placed the evidence bag with her shears on the seat beside her. "Welcome to the family, Ms. Sharma," he said, his voice laced with a dark irony that made her skin crawl. The heavy door closed with a soft, definitive thud, shutting out the world she knew and sealing her inside his. Ronan Kincaid's version of protection was a penthouse apartment that occupied the entire top floor of a skyscraper, spearing the Chicago sky. It was a place of cold glass, sharp angles, and austere minimalist furniture that likely cost more than her father's lifetime of work. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city, but it felt less like a vista and more like the transparent walls of a very luxurious prison. Her first 24 hours were spent in a state of numb disbelief, monitored by a silent housekeeper named Mrs. Gable, who moved like a ghost, and a guard who stood permanently stationed in the hall outside her door. Her father had been moved that first night. Ronan had informed her of this with the same clinical detachment he might use to discuss a stock portfolio. "He's in a private facility on the North Shore. The best care money can buy. He is safe. No one can get to him." It was meant to be a reassurance, but it felt like another bar clicking into place on her cage. Her one connection to her old life was now under his complete control. On the third night, she was pacing the length of the cavernous living room, a caged animal in a space too vast and empty, when he appeared. He moved without a sound, materializing in the doorway as if summoned from the shadows. He had shed his suit jacket and tie, and the sleeves of his crisp white shirt were rolled up to his elbows, revealing muscular forearms and the intricate edge of a dark, Celtic knot tattoo that disappeared under his cuff. "You're not sleeping," he stated, his eyes taking in her restless energy. "This place is too quiet," she countered, gesturing at the silent, glittering tapestry of the city below. "I'm used to the noise, sirens, shouting, the sounds of a city that's constantly falling apart. This," she shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her. "This is the sound of nothing." "Nothing is safe," he replied, his logic unassailable. "Nothing is lonely," she retorted, turning to face him fully, her frustration finally boiling over. "Why am I here, Ronan? Really? You could have put a guard on my apartment. You could have hidden me in some safe house in the suburbs. Why bring me into the heart of your world?" He walked over to the immense window, his reflection a dark phantom against the distant lights. "The Vasilyevs are not simple thugs. They are meticulous. Hiding you would only be a temporary solution. They would have found you eventually." He paused, his gaze fixed on the city below. "And I do not like variables I cannot directly observe." "So I'm a science experiment? A specimen in a jar?" Her voice rose with indignation. He turned from the window, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something other than cold control in his eyes. It was a deep, profound weariness that seemed to settle in his bones. "You are the one person outside my organization who saw my brother's attackers. You are a threat to them, which makes you a target. And because I am now responsible for you, that makes you a liability to me. Bringing you here is not about your comfort, Anya. It's about my control." His brutal honesty was a slap. He wasn't trying to charm her or reassure her. He was laying out the cold, hard calculus of her situation. It was infuriating, and yet, strangely, she respected it more than she would have a comforting lie. "And what about Finn?" she asked, changing tactics, looking for a chink in his armor. "How is he?" "Stable. He'll recover." The words were clipped, but she heard the undercurrent of visceral relief. "The doctor said your intervention in the alley saved his life, that if you had waited for the police..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew the answer. So you do feel gratitude, she pushed, stepping closer, challenging the fortress he'd built around himself. It's not just about control and liabilities. His gray gaze locked with hers. The space between them crackled with a sudden, tense energy. Gratitude is a luxury, Anya. It's an emotion that can be exploited. I have my brother back. That is the fact. The rest is noise. You talk about emotion like it's a disease, she said, her voice dropping, matching his intensity. What happens when you can't control it? When something gets under your skin and you can't just file it away as a fact? His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in his cheek. He was close enough now that she could see the faint silvery line of a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the subtle complexities of his gray eyes. They weren't just cold, they were guarded, fortified, like the walls of a keep. Nothing gets under my skin, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Doesn't it? She whispered, holding his gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. For a long, charged moment, the only sound was the whisper of the building's advanced ventilation system. He was a man accustomed to people cowering, to an immediate obedience born of fear. Her defiance, her refusal to be categorized as either a threat or a pawn, clearly unsettled him. He was studying her, and she realized with a jolt that she was studying him too, looking for the cracks in his marble facade. The hint of the man behind the monster. He broke the gaze first, turning away with a sharp, dismissive movement. The Vasilyevs hit another of my warehouses tonight, a shipment of electronics. It was an act of retaliation. He spoke as if briefing a subordinate. They are testing me, trying to see how I'll react now that Finn is out of commission. And how will you react? She asked, her voice quiet. I will do what is necessary, he said, the coldness snapping back into his voice like a steel trap. I will remind them why this city belongs to the Kincaids. And you will stay here, where I can ensure you do not become collateral damage in that lesson. He started to walk away, his dismissal of her absolute. But Anya's voice stopped him at the doorway. What you're doing isn't protection, Ronan. It's possession. You think because you control my surroundings, you control me. But you don't. He paused, his broad back to her. He didn't turn around, but his voice, soft and chilling, drifted back to her. Don't I? Then he was gone, leaving his question hanging in the sterile, silent air like a threat. Anya stood trembling, not from fear, but from a turbulent, chaotic mix of anger and a strange, unwelcome flicker of connection. She had seen behind the mask just for a second. She'd seen a man burdened by a crown he never asked for, a brother who loved fiercely, and a soul so heavily armored, she wondered if he even remembered what it felt like to be vulnerable. And a terrifying thought occurred to her. In this gilded cage, the most dangerous thing wasn't the men hunting her from the outside, but the formidable, broken man who had locked her inside. The lesson Ronan promised the Vasilyevs came 3 nights later. Anya learned of it not from him, but from the flickering blue light of the television news, a sanitized report on a catastrophic gas line explosion at a warehouse in the Port District, a property known to be a hub for the Russian syndicate. The reporter, a young woman with a somber face, mentioned multiple fatalities. Anya felt a wave of nausea. She looked out her window at the peaceful, glittering city, knowing that beneath that beautiful surface, a brutal war was being waged, a war she was now inextricably part of. Ronan didn't return to the penthouse that night, or the next. The silence in the apartment grew heavier, more charged. She found herself watching the door, listening for his soundless footsteps, a subconscious habit that infuriated her. When he finally appeared on the 3rd evening, he looked like a ghost that had walked through hell. There were dark, bruised circles under his eyes and a fresh, angry cut stitched neatly on his cheekbone. He walked straight to the bar and poured 2 fingers of amber whiskey, downing it in one swift, harsh motion. It's done, he said, his voice raw, as he poured another. The news called it a gas leak, she said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The news is often inaccurate, he replied, his back still to her. He finally turned, his gray eyes searching her face as if looking for a verdict. Does it bother you, knowing what I am, what I do? She had asked herself the same question for 72 agonizing hours. As a medic, her entire existence was dedicated to preserving life, to mitigating harm. He was the antithesis of that. He was the harm. Yes, she said, her voice unwavering with the weight of her honesty. It bothers me. But what bothers me more is that I think I understand it. They tried to kill your brother. They were coming for me, for my father. You talk about control, but what you did, that was control, wasn't it? Taking it back from them. He stared at her, a strange, unreadable expression on his face, as if she had spoken a language he understood, but had never heard from another person. You see things too clearly, Anya. It's a paramedic's curse, she said with a humorless smile. We see the cause and effect in everything. A drunk driver, a grieving family, a gunshot, a collapsed lung. She took a deep breath, her gaze meeting his. A mob war, and me, stuck in the middle. He walked over to her, closing the space between them until only a foot of charged air remained. The smell of whiskey and the faint, clean scent of his soap filled her senses. You are not stuck in the middle, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, almost a caress. You are on my side, whether you chose it or not. He reached out, his calloused fingers lightly brushing the side of her face. His touch was hesitant, almost tentative, a stark, shocking contrast to the violence he was clearly capable of. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and a jolt of pure electricity shot through her, sharp and undeniable. It was wrong, all of it. He was a killer, a monster cloaked in $1,000 suit. But in that moment, he was also the only thing keeping the other monsters at bay. He was her captor and her protector, her fear and her safety, all wrapped in one impossible, dangerous package. Ronan, don't, she whispered, her voice barely audible, shaking with the force of her own conflicting emotions. Why, he murmured, his eyes fixed on her lips, his own face a mask of fierce concentration. Are you afraid? Terrified, she breathed, the confession ripped from her. A ghost of a smile, the first genuine one she had ever seen, touched his lips. It transformed his harsh features into something devastatingly handsome. Good, he said, his voice a low rumble. So am I. And then he closed the final distance and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle or tentative kiss. It was hard and desperate, a collision of two broken, lonely worlds searching for an anchor in a storm. It was a kiss full of grief and violence, and a fierce, unexpected tenderness that shattered her defenses. It tasted of expensive whiskey and profound regret, and the terrifying, undeniable truth that she was no longer just a variable in his life. She was the echo in the alley, the one unpredictable sound that had changed the course of everything. And as she kissed him back, surrendering to the hurricane, she knew with chilling certainty that there was no going back. She was his, and maybe, just maybe, in the ruins of both their lives, he was hers too.